Hi everyone, this is Dan with ThoroughCare. CMS published the final rule for the physician fee schedule for what to expect in 2023. In this video, we'll share some highlights from a recent webinar that I did with Carrie Nixon of Nixon Gwilt Law. We'll talk about what you can expect in 2023, how the rates will change based on changes to that conversion factor that was announced, and other changes to virtual care management that you can expect.
Let's dive in. So this is the big news that came out, and when we heard that this came out in November, we have a couple options. One, we can download the 2,953 page report and read it ourselves. But if anyone on the call is like our team, we just call our friends at Nixon Gwilt because we know you have a staff of people reading this right away, right, Carrie?
That's right.
And that's interpreting it. But let's take a step back. Before this came out in November, the procedures, typically CMS releases a proposal earlier in the year, and they usually do that around July with what they expect to cover. And then they ask for feedback, and we'll talk more about feedback later. But during that comment period, it's time for everyone to tell CMS how you feel about these changes. What are we missing? What do we have right? And so, Carrie, we'll dive into the details, but, do you feel that CMS, listened to a lot of those comments, and is the final rule what you expected it to be?
Yeah. So I do think that CMS listened. Do I think that they got everything right and exactly how I would certainly like to see it, and probably some of our participants on this call would like to see it? No, but it is progress, and it is a work in progress, and it is steps forward in the right direction for sure. So I'm excited, about the direction that we are headed. It is still important that we continue to work with CMS to make some additional changes that are going to make these programs easier for practitioners to implement and better for patients. Awesome.
And as we dive in, there's a lot of changes across, really everything to do with healthcare. We're focusing on, for the sake of this webinar, the ones that are around the care management programs, a lot of the CMS type of reimbursements. And I think that the one thing that everyone asks is, are the payment rates the same? So I used to make this much when I did this service. Can I expect that in 2023? And for the most part, you can. There is a slight decrease. And one of the reasons is this conversion factor. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Medicare billing, the conversion factor is a value that's used in the formula that sets the rates for a lot of the programs that you participate in. And in 2022, the conversion factor was about $34.61. The announcement was that in 2023, this conversion factor would be reduced to $33.06. So if you're doing the math, it's $1.55 less, roughly 4.47%. And why the conversion factor is important, this is the formula that CMS uses to calculate a lot of the payments. And you can see on the far right, the value that is calculated is multiplied times the conversion factor. So when that drops even slightly, like it's scheduled to do in 2023, there is a downstream effect, unfortunately. But luckily, it's not a major drop. And we're going to show you the exact rates in the next slide here. But the reason, Carrie, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, is that there was a temporary increase of 3% in 2022 that is set to expire. Some legislation is not being renewed. And I know, Carrie, that a lot of folks out there are lobbying Congress to say, hey, don't let that increase expire. Keep it going into 2023. And I'd like to get your thoughts, Carrie. Do you think there's a chance of influencing Congress, and maybe they do keep that 3%, and so perhaps the conversion factor doesn't drop like it's anticipated to?
Yeah, I think we would have to see an awful lot of noise for that to happen. I think probably the sense is going to be it's not that big of a deal, right? We know in reality that it actually is a big deal when you sort of multiply those that general decrease, and you sort of carry it out to an overall, yearly budget figure. But it is the case that we are still seeing impacts from COVID and from the pandemic, and it is the case that, certainly Congress and the regulatory agencies are aware of that. I wouldn't put my money on it for sure. But, it never hurts to make your voice heard with your congressional representatives, because frankly, you never know what might kind of get slid into a piece of legislation at the last minute. That absolutely happens.
So, Carrie, even if it doesn't happen by, December 31st, there's always the possibility that, hey, mid next year, Congress signs something and they agree to put the 3% back. So we could be on the lookout for that, right? That could be a pleasant surprise if that would happen.
100%. And, again, this is sort of, it underscores the importance of being in contact with your federal representatives, because they are the ones that hold the power of the purse and have the ability to make these things happen.
Makes sense. So let's show everyone, Carrie, what the rates look like. We said there's going to be a slight drop, and let's start with chronic care management. That's probably one of the most widely known ones. In 2022, it was about $62. So we're saying in 2023, it's going to be about $61. So you can see we put in red on the right side what the change is. And I think there's some good news and bad news. The good news is there's no major drops. And for those of you who followed this last year, about this time last year, we were telling you how RPM is $20 less. There's nothing like that this year in 2023. So you're looking at $1. A lot of these are less than $1. Let me go to the next slide here. Here's RPM, remote patient monitoring, codes like 99457 down 45 cents, 99458 down 29 cents. So, there's some good and bad. Yes, we always hate to see red on the screen here, but Carrie, I think people can say the changes are probably small enough that this isn't going to impact our business or our practice as much as it could have. Would you agree with that, Carrie?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you never want to see red on the board, but unfortunately, it's what we usually see, right? We've gotten used to seeing that over the years. It is the case that overall reimbursement rates have tended to trend toward a slight drop, right? So these changes that you have highlighted here on the screen are not anything special related to the care management programs. They are reflective of across the board cuts and reducements for reimbursements in the Medicare system as a whole.
There is one on here at the bottom. You can see chronic pain management. That's brand new for 2023. But, overall, I think if you're looking at the rates, like we said, it could have been worse, but $1 is definitely much more easier to deal with than the alternative.
Yeah, and I'll just note as well, Dan, we did see a significant increase in reimbursement to chronic care management this past year. And my hope, frankly, is that is a trend that might carry over into some of the additional care management services going forward.
That's a good point. It was so nice to tell people last year, Carrie, that it was $20 more. We were so popular on the webinar.
I know.
But also, I want to stress too that for those of you who are looking at the last sheet here and saying, "Hey, those aren't even my 2022 numbers. You guys are way off." Just to explain how it works in the Medicare side, all these programs are geographically based. And so the way to find out exactly what your rate is going to be is the physician fee schedule. And you'll see the year, and then you can put in your MAC or your local zip code and see what your rates are going to be. So if anyone hasn't used the physician fee schedule search, it's very helpful. You can use it for anything that your practice does, and you will get the exact rate. You can see facility or non-facility. I think if we take a step back, is there good news? Is there anything we could look and say, hey, this is a positive out of the final rule? And so I think I agree there's good news. I would So you probably do too, Carrie. Do you want to talk about maybe some things that you're optimistic about?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we are seeing data that's collected by both sort of vendors of these services and their customers is really demonstrating now that these programs do improve outcomes and reduce overall cost of care. And the more data that we have about that, the more likely we are to see, like we saw with chronic care management, an increase in reimbursement because of a recognition that the service is actually very valuable. So my hope is that what we saw with chronic care management, with a significant reimbursement hike this past year, we will see in the not too distant future for remote physiologic and remote patient monitoring and some of the other services that some folks feel have been sort of undervalued. So that's great. That data is also going to facilitate the transition to value-based care programs pretty readily. I am hopeful that we're going to, continue to see sort of new care management programs, come down the pike, and that we're going to continue to see improvements. As you say, they're getting better with age. We're going to see improvements as we go. The final piece of good news, I know you want to talk about the rate cuts, but the final piece of sort of good news that I will share is, I think we are on a trajectory where CMS has expressed an openness to really hearing from stakeholders. They have specifically called out in the chronic pain management codes, in the RTM codes, specifically in the rule, said we want to continue to engage with stakeholders to make these programs better. That's good news.
My good news, I think no major rate cuts. I hated telling people last year that RTM was $20 less, and it was awful to say. And I think keeping it steady, even if it's a slight drop, that's a positive. But I always like, CMS programs get better every year. And, like a good wine, you might not want to drink it the first year, maybe wait a year or two. But to give you an example of that point here, this is CCM. And some of you might not remember CCM in its early years. It was horrible. It was $42. You had to sign a form with the patient. They had to be in your clinic for the initiating visit. RHCs and FQs, you couldn't even do it at all. So that was year one of CCM. And then I think CCM, Carrie, kind of took off around 2018. We just came off some new reimbursement codes for 20 extra minutes, 60 minutes, and then it jumped to $62. So that's 3 to 4 years in. So when I see CPM come out and year one's maybe, not something that we're thrilled about, I can't wait to see it in 3 years. And RTM, I think we're getting close. I think we're on the verge. So I take that as a positive.
If you'd like to learn more about what to expect in 23 or other changes to these programs, check out our Learning Center. There's links in the description below. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like it below or subscribe. Thanks for watching.